It's indeed an honor and a privilege to be with you people today. I got several Simplifies this morning, and I've looked, but do we have a World War II Marine with us today? World War II Marine? No. Then you take a good look at this 88-year-old World War II Marine, and then you know why the Marine Corps is still looking for a few good men. It was after 9/11, my son said, "Dad, we've got to write your story." And I said, "Well, I've got a story to tell, and you're a good writer." So we wrote my book. And after we had written the book, I thought, well, to whom do I go to do that forward for me? And I called my son one morning. I said, "What would you think if I tried to get a hold of Colonel Oliver North and see if he would do the forward for me?" And David said, "Dad, I know someone that knows his email." I said, "That's all I need." I sent him an email, and he emailed me back and said, "Send me the guts of your book." I sent him the guts of the book. A few days later, I get a phone call from Fallujah, Colonel Oliver North. He said, "Ed Harrell, I would be honored to do the foreword of your book." He said, "I'd wanted to do a war story on it, but there's no film footage." And anyway, he did the foreword, and I invited him to Indianapolis. We were having our reunion soon after that. And lo and behold, he came and he spoke to our group, and I had the honor of introducing him to the survivors, those that were still living, and the families of those. And even at that one, we had about 1,000 people there. Since then, it's been my privilege to travel the U.S. telling the USS Indianapolis story, my experience. Now, many books have been written, 3 New York Times best authors, etc., best stories, but I know all 3 of those authors, and I've said to them, the only thing, you weren't there, I was. And so my book has to do with my story. I joined the Marine Corps in 1943 as an 18-year-old boy. San Diego boot camp, they sent me to sea school, and then they sent me up to San Francisco, and there was the USS Indianapolis, and that's to be my home for the duration of the war. Soon after I went aboard, we were at Saipan, Tinian, Guam, Sea Battle of the Philippine Seas, and in that particular Battle of the Philippine Seas, our task force 58, we shot down 403 Japanese aircraft. Not our ship, our task force. We were successful in getting some ourselves, likewise. And then from there, then I was down at Palau. Actually, we sat on our guns for 17 days, nearly straight. We should have bypassed Palau completely. We could have starved them out, but we lost thousands of our boys there. Then from there, then I was at Iwo Jima, at Okinawa, where we received a kamikaze plane, and I can see that plane today as the boatswain blew the whistle to set emergency condition in the anti-aircraft guns, and about 12 seconds later, he hit. And as he hit the after part of the ship, one armor-piercing bomb went in the water, one went all the way through the ship. When I say went all the way through, it went through the mess hall, a berthing compartment, water distilling plant, went out the bottom and exploded on the big shaft that turned the screws. We lost several boys and thus we had to make a trip back to the States for repair. Soon after repair, we were told that we were to get underway to go back to the forward area. And we noticed out on the dock a lot of brass, Navy, Marine, and Marines actually in somewhat battle gear, and they were guarding something. And we wonder, what is that big, say, 15-foot long box or so, 4 feet high, 4 feet or so wide? And our crane reached over and picked that up and set it on the quarterdeck. My Marine captain said, Harrell, station a guard in the port hangar deck and guard that box. Well, what are we guarding, Captain Parks? He said, we don't know. Don't know what we're guarding? No. Skipper of the ship doesn't know. But we're told that every hour that we delay in getting it to the forward area, which would be our B-29 base on Tinian Island, would cost lives. And then all of a sudden there were a couple of proposed to be Air Force officers coming aboard. And as they came aboard, they had a little canister in a metal cage with a padlock on it, and they set that on the quarterdeck. And a couple of sailors came along, and they put a steel rod kind of through that, put that up on their shoulders, took it up to the forward area, and took it in a certain compartment up there. My Marine captain said, Harrell, station a guard on the outside of the hatch there to guard. Ever what that is. What is it? He said, we don't know. We don't know what we're guarding. No, we don't even know who those Air Force officers are. But it's kind of strange, 2 Air Force officers aboard a Navy ship. But may I say, they were not Air Force officers, we found out later. They were scientists from Los Alamos, New Mexico. And if you know your history, we had not exploded the first operational atomic bomb, not until that day. We got underway with that cargo going to our B-29 base on Tinian. Later, we discovered those 2 men were scientists from Los Alamos. What we were guarding there was half of the uranium that America owned at that time. The other half would be flown from San Francisco to meet us once we were in Tinian Island. 5,400 miles from San Francisco to Tinian Island. Would you believe that we made that in 10 days in a heavy cruiser, unloaded our cargo, still not knowing what we had? We didn't find out until a few days later, August the 6th, August the 9th, when we discovered that what we were guarding was the components of Fat Man and Little Boy, the 2 atomic bombs that on August the 6th and August the 9th would be dropped at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We received orders after delivering the components of the atomic bombs from SINPAC, Central Pacific Command there in Guam. We pretty much knew what our orders were to be because our ship was the flagship of Admiral Spruance. And we knew that the main invasion of Japan was to have taken place in November of 45. Captain McVeigh asked for his sailing orders, and yes, you're to go to the Philippines to practice, to be ready for the main invasion of Japan. Captain McVeigh asked for an escort, and they tell him, you don't need an escort. Don't need an escort? We don't have underwater sound gear aboard a heavy cruiser. But they tell him you don't need an escort, but may I say, they were not telling the truth. They could have said, you need an escort because 4 days ago we lost a destroyer, USS Underhill, we lost 129 boys. They could have said, you need an escort because we've broken a Japanese code, we know everything that they're doing. They could have even said, you need an escort because there is some Taman groups of submarines, Japanese submarines, working in those waters. We even know that there's one out there by the name or number of I-58, actually the one that a few days later would sink us. But they send us out unescorted. some 1,100 miles across from Guam to the Philippines. It was 3 days out of Guam on the night of July 30, 1945. I had just gotten off a watch at 12 o'clock, and I might say that the weather pretty much every day, but that day was like 110 degrees. We don't have air conditioning aboard the heavy cruiser, and a good captain would say, you're welcome to come topside and make your pallet anywheres out on the open deck. So when I got off a watch, I go below deck and I get my blanket. I don't get my Kapok life jacket. All the hatches are open, and I make my way all the way to the forward area. If you could see a picture of the ship, you could see there's a big turret of 8-inch guns. Number 1, number 2, and number 3 turrets. I go all the way forward, and I take off my shoes, and I kind of use my shoe, arch of my shoe for a pillow. I put my blanket over that, and now we're moving about 15 miles an hour, and it's a little windy, and I kind of put my blanket over my head, and I'm sure I just begun to doze off to sleep, and about 14 minutes past midnight, a massive explosion. And when I say massive, Hoshimoto was waiting there, and he had a good target in that his periscope was up. He could see us. He could pick us up. We could not detect him. He picked us up some 10 miles, and he's waiting. And he asked the crew to stand by, load the torpedoes, even load 2 human torpedoes. 2 men would be in what we call the Keoton, which is a torpedo that once it's fired, they can control it. And if they miss, they can turn and come back and go again. The only one thing that it would not do, they could not recover it. So it was a suicide mission. They wanted to be fired. Commander Hoshimoto, I read his book, sunk. And he says, he tells them, code red, stand by, fire! And every 2 seconds, he fired a torpedo. He fired 6. Did not fire the human torpedoes because he felt that his target was too good, and why expend the life of 2 boys? So they were not fired, even though they wanted to be fired. I recall I'm sleeping there on the open deck, and that first torpedo cut about 45 feet of the bow off. Now, that bow is nearly 3 stories deep at that point even. And may I say, that bow was not there. I'm within 25 feet or so. I'm under the barrels of number 1 turret. And the second torpedo was back close to the marine compartment. No doubt a big gaping hole there, but no one lived to tell anything about that. And I realized in an instant nearly that the ship was doomed. If you can visualize that about 45 feet of that was cut off, and now we're moving in the water, and the water is being forced in. I mean forced in literally to the extent that it's going to break bulkheads, whatever is in its road. And as I took inventory as to where I am, what's happening, many explosions. In fact, there was a 3rd major explosion, which was the magazine under what we call number 2 turret. That exploded and went through the top of that turret and actually picked the turret up and set it a little bit to one side. And I realized I've got to make my way back midship, which is my emergency station, and from there I would receive orders as to what I'm to do. But I knew that the ship was doomed. I could hear the bulkheads down below breaking, literally breaking. I mean, it was just a death blow. You could tell that the ship was doomed. But as I made my way back to midship, I realized I don't have a life jacket. Mine is locked in my locker down in the marine compartment. But on the way back, there were officers that were coming out of the forward area onto the main deck. And as they came out, I could see that they were flash burned in their night clothing, maybe just a pair of skivvies. And some actually, maybe if they touched the bulkhead that was blistering hot, they would leave the skin of the hand on the bulkhead. But as they came out on the open deck, they were pleading for someone to give them some assistance, but there was really nothing that I could do, and that was not my responsibility. I'm to report to my emergency station. We could have been in combat again, but we were not firing at anyone. No one was firing at us. We'd already received the death blow. But as I made my way then back to the quarterdeck, realizing I don't have a life jacket, and I get to the quarterdeck, I look at all of the big canvas bags of new supply of Kapok life jacket. I asked my Marine Lieutenant Stauffer, permission to cut down some of the life jacket. He said, not until we get word to abandon ship. The ship is sinking. If you could visualize that the first 100 yards of the ship is already under, and the ship is beginning to list so much water inside, just all the way back. Well, the ship is twice the length of a football field, 610 feet long. So the first 100 yards basically is under. And my Marine lieutenant said, not until we get word to abandon ship. Well, all communication is knocked out. A good captain couldn't give orders other than abandon ship, which later came. But a Navy commander, when he came through the hatch, came up on the quarterdeck. I recognized who he was, but he was flash burned and nearly beyond recognition. And some sailors said, get the commander a life jacket, and they began to cut down some of the life jackets. And I managed to reach in and get me a Kapok life jacket. Now, if you don't know what an old Kapok life jacket is, if you know what a horse collar is, well, it's like a horse collar that will fasten in the straddle, and it's made of Kapok, and it's a good flotation device, a little tag that says it's good for 48 hours. Well, I managed to get me one of those, and I put it on, but I didn't fasten it because I knew that momentarily I'm going to be leaving the ship, or the ship is going to leave me. And then we're waiting, desperately waiting. By now, the first 100 yards is under. The ship is listing to the starboard to where you can hardly stand on the quarterdeck, and normally the quarterdeck would be 8 feet above water line, but water is on the quarterdeck. And we're desperately waiting for word to come down from the good captain, abandon ship. He had sent someone below deck to take inventory to see if the ship was salvageable before he announced abandon ship. That individual never came back to surface. And finally, Captain McVeigh, all he could do, all communication is knocked out, no lights, no power, no electrics. And he gives word, abandon ship. And you could imagine that just passing from individuals down, abandon ship. Well, I don't know how many might have been on the quarterdeck, but I've often thought maybe there was 100 plus of us anyhow. And when word came to abandon ship, well, everyone, rushed to the high side, the port side, and climbed over that rail. And by now, the deck of the ship and the keel of the ship neither is level. And to go over and hold on to that cable and look out into the blackness of the night and think, this is the end of life. This is the end of life. And to hold on to that rail and see boys jump over, climb over, and see them jump into that water, which everyone said is a half an inch of oil on the water. And if you went into that head first, you could only imagine what's going to happen. And I hung onto that rail. And may I say, there's times when you pray, and there's times when you pray, and there's a difference. I looked out into the blackness of the night, and I prayed. Now, may I say, I knew to whom I was praying. Let me tell you a little story. I joined the Marine Corps as an 18-year-old boy. Indianapolis, Indiana, of all places, sworn in the Marine Corps. They sent me home on the first day of August 1943. I went to a little Baptist church in Murray, Kentucky, and the Lord was speaking to my heart that morning as I went to church, a Marine, but had never even been to boot camp. I knew I was not prepared to meet my Lord. There that Lord's Day morning, many times as a youngster, though, I went forward and I made some kind of a profession, but I had not trusted the Lord. But there that Lord's Day morning, I gave my heart and life to Jesus Christ. And so now, as I'm holding on to that rail, I'm praying, Lord, I don't want to die. Mom and Dad back home, 2 sisters, 6 younger brothers, and a certain brunette that said that she would wait for me. I don't know what all I promised the Lord. I heard not audibly, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your hearts be troubled. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I'm scared to death. May I say, after the war, 1947, that brunette was still waiting. We were married July the 25th, 1947. You can calculate July the 25th this year, coming up soon, 66 years. She's still waiting. I called her last evening. I left the ship, though, knowing somehow, some way, the Lord is saying to me, I'm going to be with you. I didn't know I'm going to be out there 4.5 days swimming with the sharks. I stepped over the rail. I jumped into the water feet first because of all that oil on the water. Went in feet first. That K-pot jacket came up over my head, and I have to get my head above that oil and to swim away from it, to look back and see the first half of the ship is under. The fantail is sticking high in the air. Those big screws are still turning. Boys are jumping off. Some actually are jumping into those screws. They cannot see in the blackness of the night down below. We down below can see with a little silhouette of light from the ship. We can see some jumping into that. Then I saw the ship as she turned to the starboard and goes under. We take inventory of our little group, and there were 2 other Marines. May I say, I don't know how much time I have this morning, but there were 2 Marines. One I knew real well. The other Marine, I did not know him. We had new ones that came aboard. I tried to help him. He was literally dying, been blown against the bulkhead, multiple breaks in his body. I tried to help him with a little bit of flash of light I could see, but I didn't recognize who he was. I knew he was one of the new boys. He didn't make it till daybreak. I want to just tell this story because after these years, 2 years ago, the legislature in Iowa was trying to pay honor to about 30 boys from Iowa that was on the Indianapolis, of which 28 did not survive, 2 did. As a survivor, they had contacted me. Did you know any of the boys? Do you know how we might find out who they were and so on? I said, yes, I do. I can tell you the address of the parents back at that time. We had that information. I sent them that. And different ones then began to contact me. Someone asked about a certain Marine. Now, there was only 2 new ones that had come aboard. A certain Marine. Did you know a certain Marine? The name rings a bell, but I don't know. I said they were the new boys that came aboard. And here granddaughter says, I have a picture of that Marine, my uncle, and she sent that to me. And when I saw that picture, I broke down and sobbed, because these years I didn't know who that Marine was that I saw pass into eternity. And I had to share with her my thoughts, at least, who that might have been. Now then, the other Marine, I'll bring him up in a little bit. That was Spooner. Spooner and I were the only two Marines in that group. The next morning, the first day, we had company. When I say we had company, at any given time, you could see a big fin cutting around and around. There were about 80 of us, and you can imagine the fright from that. And we had trouble staying together. So we said, hook your jacket on to the next person, just form a circle and try to keep everyone in. And when we'd go up on a swell, then you'd kind of drift together. But it isn't long till someone begins to hallucinate. Maybe he's been injured, and he can see in his mind, he can see an oasis out there. I had one to swim up to me. Hey, Marine, see that island over there? I just came from there. Captain Parks, Lieutenant Stoffer's over there. They're having a picnic. I want you to come over there. Come and join them. I knew better, but nearly convincing. And then I'd just see him swim away then to his imagination and hear a blood-curdling scream and see that Kapok go under, and then momentarily a Kapok would bring the body back to the surface, but you dared not to go and check who your buddy is, because you could see all kinds of fins coming to the blood, and you steered clear completely. But sometime later, maybe you took the dog tag off of that, whomever that was, and in checking him, you find out the bottom torso is gone or is disemboweled, and you give that, you give his dog tags to, say, an able-bodied person and say, you keep all the dog tags. Okay. After a period of time, maybe he's got a dozen or so. Now, but where is he? He's gone. We learned something from your mistakes. Okay. We had company the first day. Sharks, sharks, sharks. And by the second day, if you can imagine, you're bareheaded, 110 degrees, you're swimming nearly constantly. And by now, even the second day, your Kapok jacket has begun to get kind of waterlogged. And now let's bring you through. I'll go back to the second day and talk about my buddy Spooner. Spooner had gone into the water head first, and he had all that oil in his eyes, and you can just imagine, you stick your head in a half-inch of oil, black oil, and now you look up at the sun. Now how do you get that oil out? The more you rub, the more you irritate your eyes. You get that salt water in your eyes, you look up at the sun, that salt becomes powder, you rub your eyes, you're rubbing salt into your eyes, and even by the second day, Spooner's eyes were two big red sores. He couldn't blink his eyes. And Spooner said to me, he said, Harrell, we know no word got off the ship. No one's looking for us. Well, may I say, word did get off and ignored. Read the book. And Spooner said, I can't take this anymore. He said, I'm going to commit suicide. Spooner, you're not. How are you going to do it? He said, I'm going to swim down so far I'll drown before I come back up. I said, Spooner, there's only 2 Marines in this group, and there's going to be 2 Marines when help comes, and help will come. And I turned his back to mine and fastened his Kapok jacket onto mine and swam together with him through that night. Sometime later in the afternoon that second day, you can imagine that you've been thirsty. But have you ever been so thirsty that your lips are swelled up and actually breaking open you're so thirsty, your tongue is swelling in your mouth, you can hardly talk, and it's 110-degree weather, and you're struggling, and by now your kapok jacket is so waterlogged that you're having to keep pedaling all the time. Now let's come through that day. Let's come to the third day. Third day by noon, there's only 17 of us. Now what has happened? Sharks didn't get them all. I've often said, it's much easier to die than to live. And I saw boys that had just completely given out. And by now, the kapok jacket on the third day will not hold your head out of the water. And so what do? You take it off and you sit in it. And then now you have to keep moving just to keep it from pitching you in the water. And so you're struggling. And so sometime that third day at noon, there's only 17 of us. And I mentioned earlier when I was holding on the rail, looking out into the blackness of the night, there's time to pray. We realize we aren't going to make it unless help comes. No water, and our kapok jackets now the third day is giving out, and we have no energy, and yet we're plugging away. And then it was sometime about noon or so that third day. My watch is in the museum in Indianapolis, and it would run today if someone was there to wind it. About 1 o'clock there that third day, we heard voices. Now, may I say from experience, there's times when you can hear something that's not there. There's times when you can see something out there that's not there. Believe me. Third day at noon, 17 of us. And we are praying. Everyone that would pray audibly would pray. Some of us knew to whom we were praying. I remember this one sailor, God, if you're out there, I don't want to die. I've got a son back home I've never seen. We were desperate. About 1 o'clock, though, that day, we came up on a swell, and we could look off at a distance and see, look, there's a raft. And we would yell out at them. They're close enough that we could hear that they are talking, they're making noise. And finally they responded in English. We knew it had to be some of our buddies. And after a period of time here, I don't know, I think there was 5 sailors. They were around a little makeshift of a raft. And they get closer and closer, and finally they join us. But a little makeshift of a raft, no one was on the raft. And we wondered as they came in closer and closer, 5 sailors, and they were just hanging on to a makeshift of a raft and one arm swimming. Now, that raft consisted of 4 40-millimeter ammunition cans, which are basically flotation devices if they're fastened up. And then 2 or 3, something like potato crates, old slatted potato crate, orange crates, and they had lashed those together, and they'd taken kapok jackets off of boys already expired, and they showed us how that they could take those and squeeze them, and like an old sponge, it won't hold any more water, but it'll hold more if you squeeze it out. And they had put kapok jackets upon that little raft. And as they came into our group, we could see kapok jackets. And by now, our jackets are so waterlogged, we need a new life jacket. And so we were able to exchange and get one a little drier, at least than ours. And then they want to know, anyone want to join us? We're going to go to the Philippines. We see planes flying over at 30,000 feet. No one's looking for us. They couldn't see us. And I say to my buddy Spooner, I'm going to join them. And he says, Harrell, if you go, I'm going. So 2 Marines joined 5 sailors. Now we're going to swim, we think, to the Philippines. Now we didn't know it was another 500 miles. But when you see a group from 80, third day at noon, there's 17, it's time to do something. And so here we're plugging away. I recall seeing myself now, one arm up on that makeshift of a raft and plugging away. It's getting kind of later in the afternoon. We came up on a swell, and I said, look, there's some debris out there. Well, after a period of time, it's up when we're up, and everyone could see it. And I said, I'm going to swim out and get that. They said, well, your shark will get you too. Well, we haven't seen any sharks around us, not the last hour or two, but there was a compelling influence in saying to me, go. And so I do a dog paddle, and I finally make it out there, and I'm praying desperately for food, for water, has to be something. And when I saw that old potato crate there, I didn't pause and thank you, Lord, for what I'm about to partake of. I saw those potatoes there floating in that little crate, and I reached in and got a hold of that first potato, and kind of in the agony of defeat as that rot squeezed through my fingers, I thought, rotten potatoes. But I took my hands and kind of peeled off some of that rot, and then I peeled it with my teeth. I don't spit out all the rot. It was solid on the inside, and thus there was some water there. There's a little food there. And then I began to think like the ant, prepare for tomorrow, and I began to peel several of those potatoes. I feel my dungaree pockets full, still more rotten potatoes in the crate, and I'm nibbling on one, and I'm making my way back to my buddies, and they see that I'm nibbling on something. What is it? Rotten potatoes. It didn't matter. They left the little raft, and they came out and met me. We had a little picnic, nothing but rotten potatoes. Now, you ladies know what rotten potatoes smell like. I know what they taste like. But they were a godsend at that time. We go through the rest of that day, and then later in the afternoon, then we've found the potatoes, and then sometime later that night, then we think that we'll be able to see the moon. It's in the west, the Philippines, 500 miles or so. We'll be able to keep plugging away. Well, sometime later than that night, it was dark, and we couldn't make any headway at all. So we're just hanging on to that makeshift of a raft, not swimming, and hear voices. And after a period of time, we could holler at them, they respond back to us, and it isn't long until the Navy Lieutenant McKissick from Texas, he had several sailors, I don't know, 5 or 6 or so maybe, that were with him, and they came into our group just by voice. And as they joined us, then we shared, a certain Marine had a pocket full of potatoes that he shared with McKissick and the others, and they tell us that we got to get to the Philippines or else we aren't going to make it. And we tell them that's what we're doing. Oh, you're not going to push that raft. Yes, we are, because we got spare tires. And so anyway, we had them with us. I think there maybe was 5 or 6 sailors with McKissick, and so all we could do was just hang on to the raft. Now, I don't know what happened through the night. Now, mind you, we are completely, could I say that, completely exhausted. Been swimming 3.5 days now. And sometime later that night, no doubt, with the spare tire of the jacket, I'm sure that we just slipped off of the raft, that is, not holding on to it. But let's come to the 4th day. The 4th day, would you believe it? I'm not with the raft. I'm not with my buddy Spooner. I'm with McKissick, one other sailor. Now, where are they? No one knows. Are they still alive? No one knows. May I get way ahead of my story and say, To this date, I only know of one other that made it, and that was my buddy Spooner. Hung on to that raft. He said when everyone was gone, he knew that he couldn't make it. Harold, where are you? Didn't know where I was. I don't know where Spooner is. He said, I just hung on to that raft. No one was with me there that fourth day. I'm with McKissick and one other sailor. I knew McKissick aboard ship, knew him quite well. He was a real gentleman. And I, as a Marine corporal, and he, a Navy lieutenant, Harrell, our Marine orderly, take a message to Captain McVeigh, and he would give me the nomenclature of something that I had the foggiest idea of what he was talking about nearly. And then he would say, repeat it. Maybe we would have to repeat it 2 or 3 times. And then he'd say, okay, report to the captain. And I'd do so. So I knew Captain McVeigh and I knew McKissick quite well. But here I'm with McKissick. Even though I knew him, he was Uncle Edwin to me. I called him Uncle Edwin. I had an uncle that was 2 years older than me that I grew up with. And so here I'm with McKissick and one sailor. That sailor, I saw what I had seen so many times. He had decided just to give up. He had no will to live, no energy left, and his head had just dropped nearly in the water. I shook him. He was still alive. I tried to get him to straighten up, so to speak, and have hope that help will be here soon. And the third time that I checked him, it's too late. So it's McKissick and myself. And by now, again, we are seated in our kapok jackets. They won't hold our heads out of the water. So we're having either just give in and drown or keep swimming, keep plugging. And then all of a sudden, we hear a plane. I hear a plane. And we both were so excited because we could hear a plane. We could see a plane. And a plane about, maybe, let's say 3,000 feet high, gonna fly directly over us. You can imagine, no, you can't imagine the excitement. As we splashed water, we waved, we did everything imaginable to attract his attention. But if he knew we were down there, and I often say, if you had deer hunter orange on and he knew you were down there, impossible. But in the providence of God, it was possible, and he saw us. Let me tell you a truthful story. Lieutenant Gwynn, flying a PBY, flying a Ventura, I call it the B-25, out of Palau, out on a search and destroy mission. He was having trouble with his radio. Even down lower at 3,000 feet, he says that he could hardly even reach back at his base in Palau. That antenna that trailed behind that aircraft, the stabilizer had come off, and that antenna was just beating back and forth. And at a given moment in time, Lieutenant Gwynn says to the co-pilot, take over. I'm going to go back aft. I'm going to reel in that so-and-so antenna, and I'm going to put something on it to stabilize her. We can't call back at our base. As he opened the bomb bay door and looked down at a flash, he saw, as it were, that Boy Scout's mirror down there, the sun hitting that oil in the water. And as he saw that, he rushed back to take over control of the plane. And the crew says, what is it? They knew that he saw something. He said, look down there. Well, you don't look out an aircraft at 2,000 feet and see anything. But as he took over controls, he gets on his phone, on his speaker, load the bombs. He saw oil off of our clothing, and that said that there is something in distress down there, has left some oil. Load the bombs. He comes in on a bombing dive, literally. We see him. Thank you, Lord. He sees us. He's coming in. And we are waving. And he was coming in. And he did come in. But as he got down in that 1,000-foot range, he could see debris. He could see as far as his eyes would take him, he could see debris. He could, as he came down in circles, I can see him today. I can see him in that cockpit as he circled us 2 or 3 times. And then he doesn't know who we are. He cannot land. And then he goes back up. Why are you going back up there? I asked him later. He said, I had to go back up. I broke radio silence to call back in Palau to announce ducks on the pond. Now, whose ducks are we? No one knows. And Lieutenant Gwynn does not know who we are. But he gets on the phone now. He goes back up to where he could reach back in Palau and announce ducks on the pond. And there's Adrian Marks ready to get in a PBY to go out on a search and destroy in an hour and a half, 150 miles or so later. Here he comes on the scene, and Gwen is still there, circling us, taking inventory, watching sharks maul boys. And then finally Marks comes, and Gwen says, I've got to get back to Palau. I'm nearly out of fuel. And Marks comes in, and he takes inventory. He said he saw about 30 boys and 30 sharks attacking boys. He's on the phone asking permission to do a no-no, that is to do an open sea landing in a PBY, and they tell him no way. But the crew says, we've got to land. Look, look, sharks, sharks, sharks. And you know what Marks did? He hung up the phone, and he set that big goose down. And as he set that thing down, it hit that first swell, and it went up maybe 20, I don't know, it went up. And then finally, he got it set down. One motor would never run again. The pontoon was ruptured. So what does he do? He runs the swells, 10, 12-foot swells. He runs the swells, and he picks up stragglers. Now, it's late in the afternoon, and finally, it's dusk dark. And he has picked up 56. When he picked up the first boy, he found out USS Indianapolis. And I finally get aboard, and they threw out a little ring, and I grabbed a hold of that. They dragged me into that plane. Now, the plane is still moving. He cannot stop the plane. If he stops and he turns that prop into the bank of water, he's going to flip the plane. So he's running the swells, and he's picking up stragglers. They take me like a sack of feed and stack me against the next boy, and so on. And after a period of time, there's no more room. So what do? There's more boys before it got too dark. So he ties 7 out on the wings. There's a boy here in this town that was one of the 7. You would say, the plane won't hold 56. And it will if 7 are tied out on the wings. I looked across the plane after a bit, and I saw USMC. I saw boys with the sore eyes, and I knew it was Spooner. I saw that oil all in his hair, all in his eyes. I've got a picture back there that you can see what you look like. And I saw what Spooner was doing. Spooner was reaching down on the deck of that aircraft, and he had a can of green beans in his hand, desperate for water, and he was plugging away on some object on the deck, and he finally knocked a hole in that, and he's turning up, and he's drinking some of the bean juice. And I said, hey, Spooner, how about some of your bean juice? Spooner couldn't see me, didn't recognize me, and frankly, Spooner kind of told me where I could get off. I said, Spooner, you don't know who this is. This is Harrell. Now, I was his squad leader, and before I had swam with him, hooked onto him to me, and even at night when it was so cold, in 85-degree water, you say, that's not too cold. No, it isn't. You get out in the rain here next week at 85 degrees and just soaking wet, and then you have a 15-mile-an-hour wind and see how cold you get. And Spooner and I needed the warmth of each other. And so what did we do? Spooner would take his legs and put them around mine and put them in the pit of my tummy, mine around his legs, and hang my feet kind of behind his kidneys. We tear off some of our clothing, put it over our face so that we can lie back, maybe in our kapok jacket, not allow any water to slosh over on us to cause us to get strangled, and so we could relax just a little bit. Okay, there's Spooner with me aboard the plane. It isn't long until here it's dark, and it's quieted down in the water to where Marks can turn off that one engine that's still running. And so we're just bouncing around in the water. And all of a sudden, if you could imagine a light under a mushroom, all of a sudden at night, pitch dark, all of a sudden there is just a glow of light. Let me tell you what it was. The first destroyer that came in, Commander Clater, used to be with Amtrak, his ship. As he came in, he was a relative of Captain McVeigh. Now he knows that it's the Indianapolis. And so he turns all of his lights up under the clouds, and we knew that help was coming other than the plane. I was transferred aboard that plane, taken to Palau to the hospital. A day or two later, to Guam, the hospital. In the hospital there in Guam until after October, finally made it back to the States, ended up in Balboa Hospital, perforated appendix, 11,829,000 units of penicillin. Okay. So after 9/11, my son said, Dad, we got to write your story. And so I think I've been in 30 states, and many of them multiple times, telling of the providence of God. I want to read something in closing, and this is from Marks, Adrian Marks, telling about the possibility of Gwynn spotting us in the water. And here's what he said. What were the chances that Wilbur Gwynn would fly a course which would take him directly over you? And what were the chances that his radio antenna would break while he was out on this mission? What were the chances that he would open his Bombay doors and look straight down momentarily? And what were the chances that he would look straight down on one of you? You didn't have a chance in a million. I know that most of you prayed a lot, and I know that some of you feel that it made a difference. Wilbur Gwynn is a wonderful man and a fine pilot. He never said that he heard a voice speak to him, but was there an unseen hand on his shoulder? Did he find you by pure chance? The odds against it are 1 in a million, nay, 1 in a billion. But somehow he was chosen as the instrument to overcome these impossible astronomical odds. Wilbur Gwynn looked down at a split second that would become one of the great moments of history. I, as well as you, am proud to know him as a friend. Any sensible person knows that no one can swim for 4.5 days, and yet you did. For 40 years, I have reflected upon the blind courage and the unbelievable greatness of spirit that I saw when each survivor was brought aboard my aircraft, and I have been compelled by the evidence of my own eyes to believe in miracles. Yes, I believe in miracles, but there is a miracle which is beyond all my power of understanding, and it is a miracle that I am here with you today and not with my shipmates at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. And I thank you so much for the opportunity to come and to share of God's providence in my life. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. God bless you.